So I want to take, before we get into the real theme of the course, I want to talk just briefly what I mean by the word governance. And this is kind of a generic view um, to see how we have to think about it in general terms, and then how we have to kind of morph it, I think, into a more modern perspective. So what exactly do I mean by governance? And there's probably different definitions out there, but think of governance predominantly as a process. It's a regulating process. It's a process that enables things. Now, what are the things I want to regulate and enable? Well, usually conditions of different things in general in our physical, financial, maybe our natural environment, or in our social systems. So we think of governance as a form of government. We set things in place to make our society a good place to live in terms of our physical, financial, and social interactions. It regulates how people behave. It should regulate how our processes perform. Now, how does it work? Governance is really a process, I said, but it works from the basis of policies. Now, policies are an expression of an intent. An intent has objectives with it. Policies have to get translated into procedures and things we actually do in a working day-to-day workflow kind of environment. But it also critically uses accountability assignment and enforcement as other tools of how to make the policies have impact. So policies are our tool, translated to procedures, but without accountabilities, nobody follows the policies. And so we have to have enforcement to make sure that we follow the things in a common way. And there's many examples in society. Think about safety. Think about financial regulation and compliance. Think about the traffic flow, our traffic system with signs and traffic lights and red lights, green lights, and stop signs and yield signs. This regulates and governs our traffic flow. How we adopt technology, dealing with fraud mitigations in all forms, dealing with environmental sustainability, equipment reliability, and asset-intensive organizations. So these are simply examples of things we want to accomplish by governing how we behave and how our physical and financial systems behave along with us. So that's governance in a general sense. Now, if we think about a model, the model might look something like this. It's simplistic on purpose here to talk about, we see three building blocks. So we think of governance as a process, but it influences and directly influences how people do work or how people behave. Now, how people behave and how they do work affects the things they actually interact with. So we think about governance as a process. It produces policies and assigns accountabilities. Workers do the work, and then based on the scope of the thing the workers are involved in, those are the things that become governed, whether they're pieces of equipment, whether they're financial accounts, whether they're customers. But when we govern the things in a way we want to, we try to mitigate the risks of those things, and we produce value along the way. Now, the whole input on the left side of the screen is we need a strategic intent of why we're doing this, and we have to understand there are many external drivers beyond our control that are changing how we have to react to externalities like competition or regulations. So this becomes a very general kind of view of governance. And just a second here. So if we think about, if we walk through this, so governance is policy driven, as I said, that's the main tool. It indirectly derives value. So governance by itself does not create value. It indirectly does by having, it influences the work that people do, and it's the work that people do that create the value. So accountability has to be assigned, policies are in place, and this is where the direct link is between the governance component and the value I want to produce. It helps us prioritize, or governance helps us prioritize and coordinate our work. So the result of governed work is alignment and impactful work. Now, what that means is the things we work on, the things, whether they're customers or products or whatever, are now consistent with our policies, which means we're trying to, again, reduce the risk and create value. So the things being governed could be anything from an asset to a customer to a decision to a process to a capability. These become the things that we want to govern with policies. Now, this is a very general level here. I appreciate that. So if we think about the scope of governance, we have to have some way of defining what is the breadth and depth of the area I want to focus on. So I put two axes together here, which is sort of the goals of governance, like why are you doing it, goes back to your strategic intent, and the things being governed. And again, this is a laundry list of many, many things. This is just a general view. It could be the environment, it could be processes, people, or actions. And the reason we're governing it is on the y-axis as to become more capable, to ensure security is followed, to increase quality, etc. So this is a way to kind of think about the scope we want to define within some kind of a governance framework. So if we take these ideas, and we've historically been applying this to data over the last several years. So data governance as a discipline has been around since at least the mid part of last decade. It really started to get momentum really as a result of the financial crisis in the last decade. And so a lot of data governance principles were applied to try to increase the security, increase the quality, and make data more usable. But it wasn't just the financial crisis that was the catalyst here. It was also the perfect storm brewing by the advent of the smartphone, social media, new forms of big data, as we've heard about, the need to work with analytics. All of this perfect storm started brewing probably the middle part of last decade to say, if we want to have data a reusable asset in our company, we need to put policies around it. And most of the thinking around data governance has always been about turning data into a useful asset, which means we can share it with others. So if we think about a picture of that from the model I had earlier, we're simply saying now that we're applying these principles to data as opposed to just a generic view. And we start to look at the strategic intent of why you're doing this. Well, usually it's because I want to use data to compete, or I want data to make me more insightful so I can do something different in my company, or maybe to be more disruptive. So if we think about this as a model from data governance, there's workers that influence how data is being generated and consumed, and there's the data itself being governed. So if we walk through this, we see that data governance has always had the view, or should have had the view, of being strategically aligned to what I want to accomplish as a company, which means if I want to compete in analytics, which has been a theme for 10 to 15 years now, there's been many books published in this space, but it's based on the premise that I can reuse, share, and repurpose data. It means I have to think about data as a corporate asset, not as a necessary evil. That means I have to have policies around it to say, how can I protect it? How can I make it useful? How can I make it more available, etc. So the drivers for governance have been competitive. They've also been regulatory. There's also a heightened amount of customer expectations for personalizing services for them. There's also been changes in technology. So these become the drivers to govern just data. Now, the result of this governance should be policies and accountabilities. What is the impact of that? Well, it affects how we do work. Now, if we think about the work that is directly associated with data, there's different kinds of work we do, and there's different kinds of workers. So we need policies around how the work is carried out. It could be around the quality and security aspects of our data, how data infrastructures, databases, and et cetera are designed, how architecture is produced to make data flow and make it more available to us. There's also how people become more literate in how to use data in terms of opportunities for their own business processes. So there's policies we need to influence the behavior of people doing this kind of work. Now, the policies get translated into procedures because it's the procedures that drive how people do their work. And so kind of the procedures here understand, how do we actually manage data? How do we manage data infrastructure? How do we manage security around data? How do we manage metadata so we know where our data is? How do we catalog it to make it more available? So the procedures and policies should drive the management, but we also put a life cycle to our data. And life cycle means I know when to keep it, when to get rid of it. And I know how to find new data I don't have that I might need. So think of life cycle as almost a manufacturing process. So we have to understand that. And it also drives the methods and approaches we need to take so that we're doing things consistently with the intent of the company in terms of data sharing, data reuse, and data collaboration. So that becomes the work of people who are interacting specifically with data. Now, so if we think about the data being governed because of their work, this means that people are following the policies in an aligned fashion to do work on the data, so with the principal sharing of making the data more valuable to us. So how do we organize the data being governed? Well, usually it's by some criteria, like some common theme, like it's all about the same topic or a subject, or the data is all from a certain system, or it's about a certain process, or certain data is about a certain use case or application. So if we think about the scope of the data being governed, it could be in one of those categories. Now, why are we doing this? Well, it's to make data more useful to more people. And we want to repurpose data. So we should have higher quality. And higher quality, in my definition, says it's more useful to more people. We want to reuse data to share it across some sort of a life cycle. But we also have to protect it and secure it. So we respect privacy, we respect regulations, et cetera. We need to make data more available to more people and more accessible. Now, accessible means I have the literacy and skills to find it and get it. So if we deal with these issues, then the data by itself, hopefully, is starting to produce value. Now, but I'm going to show you a little bit later that data by itself can't produce value. This is where the change in thinking has to happen, because data per se enables value, but it by itself can't produce value. It's an indirect link. But there's risk around data of not using it or sharing it or misinterpreting it. We want to manage that, and we want to have this value idea, but we have to rethink what value means and how it's actually produced. But this is the general thinking that's been around for data governance for the last probably decade and a half or so.